So it's a great pleasure, Peter, to see you again. Peter was here last year at the Utopia Symposium and held a lecture which this, I think, might be the continuation of. So we'll get a completely different perspective now, theoretical, sociological, and from the historical ones that we just heard. So would you say a few words about yourself and then get with your lecture?
Sure. So my name is Peter, and some of you might have seen me last year. For those who have not, I shortly introduce myself. I am teaching political theory at the university in Munich. I do this in two courses, normally one mainstream and one more radical. And when it goes to research, I'm interested in something I call utopian anthropology. That is the anthropology of all humans, I would say, and my proposal is that all humans have a utopian longing in them, and that is what I was telling, what I was talking about last year. But now I found that not everything what I said was right. Well, and so I am today here to say other things that may be equally wrong, but it's one step farther. Okay, I start. Romans, countrymen and lovers, hear me for my cause, and be silent that you may hear. Yes, we are Romans, if only for a couple of days. Yes, we are countrymen, if not necessarily of the same country. Yes, we are lovers and friends of many people, and this is crucial. As I stood here last year talking about a neat anthropological concept, Homo Dystopicus, I forgot that we are tied to municipalities, regions, peers and family. That we carry the burden and savor the pleasures of societies, of institutions, of organizations, of customs and of social control. My aim was to criticize the anthropological foundations of mainstream economics and mainstream political science, Homo economicus, for its one-dimensionality, its anti-sociality and its undesirable political consequences. And whether the criticism has hit the bull's eye or not, my construction of a utopian alternative was seriously flawed. Last year's Homo Dystopicus was flawed precisely because he cannot be a lover, a countryman or a Roman. He's too individualistic and therefore he's not human. This year my goal is to extend the concept of Homo Dystopicus, introducing ever more social and political aspects, and thus to look at his flip side, Homo Dystopicus. Now I have to.
I forgot to put it in.
Oh, I can use the keyboard too.
No, this one. Just take this one out.
Yeah.
Show you. There we go.
I will firstly recap the basic features of Homo Dystopicus and point to the problems I have with him by now. Secondly, I will use an interesting counterdraft to Homo economicus, Ralph Dahrendorf's Homo sociologicus, as a backdrop for the integration of social and structural entities in our philosophical ontology. Thirdly, I will show the dystopian ramifications of understanding humans as mere role-bearers or as society's puppets. And to get there, I will argue that utopia and dystopia are basically the same, which I will show by an analysis of Thomas More's Utopia. The fourth part of my lecture is the prospective part. There I have to suggest ways that lead to an extension of Helmuth Plessner's philosophical anthropology with insights of Arnold Gehlen. I plan to overcome methodological individualism, maybe by applying Anthony Giddens's structuration theory, and I have to tie together Homo Utopicus and Homo Dystopicus. At the end, I will not reach a conclusion, but merely stop talking. The reason for this is that it is work in progress, and therefore I'm reliant on your inspiring criticism. Censor me in your wisdom and awake your senses, that you may the better judge. Of course, this know that this was Shakespeare. So, what is wrong with Homo Utopicus? At the core of many of today's most pressing problems lies the picture we humans have of ourselves. We tend to think that we are egoistic utility maximizers that would not get along with each other if it wasn't for the state to enforce orderly conduct. Because we think that greed is natural and other humans are either resources or obstacles, we want to take advantage of others and at the same time fear their cunning. Contemporary political philosophy has two solutions for this dilemma. The market with its invisible hand and the state with its visible fist. Both institutions produce more evils than goods. One of the evils is the depoliticization of the public sphere. At the market, the mode of action is economics. In the state, the mode of action is either statecraft or obedience, depending on what side of the gun or riot stick you stand. There seems to be no room for politics, which I understand as common decision-making, ideally in an egalitarian and consensual fashion. Politics is the mode of action when you argue about or struggle for some common good, including your idea of a good polity. My last year's aim was, and my aim this year is, to find ways to conceptualize the human in such a way that politics become a possibility again. To this end, I criticized Homo economicus along with contractarianism and neoliberalism and suggested the notion of Homo Utopicus, the picture of human as eccentric being that never stops to strive for a better world. And I still think that this is essentially a good idea. But I tried to synthesize Homo economicus and Homo Utopicus, and this made my notion of Homo Utopicus faulty. I really would have liked to see utopian hopes being appreciated as human constant by many people. So I argued that utopian hopes could be understood as a kind of preferences regarding norms and patterns of interpersonal dealings. So I stayed in the camp of rational choice theory. I even hoped that computer simulations could show which utopian plans might evoke stable frequencies of strategies in a given population, and thus prove that alternatives not only exist, but are reachable and worthwhile. If successful, this would have improved the widespread paradigm. Just like some biologists and economists that have succeeded to rehabilitate Kropotkin's theory of mutual aid by proving the viability of reciprocity and cooperation, I could have gained academic fame and a better or more secure university position by proving that we humans are dreamers and that wishful thinking matters if it leads to action. Unfortunately, a synthesis of Homo economicus and Homo Utopicus is in principle impossible. A utopian version of Homo economicus is still one-dimensional, it is still non-dialectical, and it is still reductionist. This is a serious problem, because I have grounded Homo Utopicus in Helmuth Plessner's philosophical anthropology. With this basis, I am bound to follow all the fundamental anthropological laws Plessner has established. It is not sufficient to transform the law of the utopian standpoint into rational choice preferences regarding how society should be. That's what I did last year. I have to accept the law of mediated immediacy and the law of natural artificiality too. That means that Humans build artificial cultures and societies, and that they do this not directly but mediated through their consciousness. To be true to Plessner, I also have to adopt a dialectical style of reasoning. Not only do humans make society, society also makes humans. Society has much influence on our consciousness, without which we cannot do anything. This is logically possible if and only if society has an ontological status itself. In rational choice theory, the only things that exist are the actors with their preferences. It remains unclear where the preferences come from, and although the acting of the actors has consequences like norms or reputation, these are seen as purely analytical. We can see them and take them into account in our strategizing, but they do not exist themselves. This is erroneous thinking. The error has a name, reductionism. The old Homo Dystopicus was reductionist because in spite of his longing for a better society, he denied the existence of any society. Therefore, he was incomplete, because he had no reason to wish for something better. His utopian preferences were just a proposition without explanation. Sad but true, I have to abandon this version of utopia. To be more precise, I have to abandon the individualistic core of Homo Dystopicus and turn to models that do incorporate, or at least not deny the existence of society. In social theory, there are several different approaches to the integration of individuals into society. Maybe the most radical is Niklas Luhmann's. For him, society consists not of people, but of communications. Luhmann's emphasis on systems, on complexity, and on contingency seems to fit Plessner's philosophical anthropology that also makes use of systems, complexity, and contingency. But somehow the whole human gets lost in Luhmann's theory. Humans are of course necessary for communications, but only as persons that occupy certain social addresses. For Luhmann, a social address is the socially defined place where a communication can be directed at, whilst a person is the specific kind of communication that is expected at this address. Luhmann's lingo is very complicated and cannot be fully understood without delving deep into his theory, wherefore I do not have the time by now. But fortunately, person and social address are not new to sociology and can be explicated using other terms and sources. I decided to use Ralph Dahrendorf's analogous terms of role and position that he used in an essay with the title Homo Sociologicus. What is Homo Sociologicus? Like all other homos, it is an artificial concept constructed with a specific purpose, namely to show how individuals and society are woven together. Every individual occupies several positions, of which each is associated with a certain role. Examples of positions are parent and kid in the family, worker and boss in the factory, treasurer and dues-paying member in associations, goalkeeper, fullback and striker in football, and so on. One human being can occupy all of these positions through a lifetime, and some of them even at the same time. The positions are not dependent on a specific human being. The boss, for example, is not a quality of a human being, but it is a place or status in society that does not cease to exist when the personal changes. Positions are places in social fields. Therefore you can't, in some countries you can't kill the king. If you kill the person that is king, the next person already is king. If you plan to do some revolution. Do not kill kings, kill position. Positions are places in social fields, and they exist independently of any human that might or might not hold them. But they are deeply influential on the human's character and acting, because every position is linked to expectations about how the holder of a position should behave, and even how he should look like. This is the role. To play the worker's role is something different than to play the boss's role. The difference lies not only in power and payment, which are socially attributed to the status. The difference lies also in the role player's perspective, their evaluation of decisions concerning the factory and their self-image, which are achievements of individual identity. Of course, this identity is the product of socialization and has social consequences. So, through positions and roles, individuals and society are bound together. Only individuals can learn how to play a role and how to act right, and only society can assign positions. There are neither individuals nor societies without vast numbers of positions and roles. Since the latter exist, so do the former. And now, our ontology encompasses both individuals and society. This is good for the theory, because it has now escaped the sloppy thinking of methodological individualism. But is it also good for the individuals and their freedom? Dahrendorf points to good reasons for answering no. Social roles exert pressure on the individual. They enforce conformity by imposing sanctions, and this is universal. Everywhere and at any time, the society shapes behavioral forms for every position in it, and it watches over the holders of the positions so that these behavioral forms are not ignored or replaced by whatever the holder pleases. Deviance entails punishment. Forms and sanctions change over the time, but they are inescapable. Thus, the roles appear as something external to the individual, something that comes from the outside and is forced into the individual, thusly not only alienating the individual from the role, but erasing it and replacing it by a set of roles. The free individual of integrity, who is their own master, ceases to be. In the light of this, it sounds even forgiving when Dahrendorf calls society an annoying fact. But he very clearly sees the dangers of giving society so much weight in his theory. Quote, "In its most horrifying aspect, the world of Homo Sociologicus is a brave new world, or a 1984, where all human behavior is calculable, reliable, and subjected to perpetual control." End quote. The most horrifying aspect is, of course, only one aspect. Punishment is not the only sanction, rewards are possible too. Role expectations seldom are strict prescriptions, mostly they consist of a range of possible deviations. Therefore, the actual behavior of role bearers can change role expectations. Individuals are more than cultural dopes. Dahrendorf's theory of Homo Sociologicus casts light on the dialectual paradox of freedom and necessity, of autonomy and conformity. This blurs the line between utopia and dystopia. Maybe they are the same, which I will now show. I expect that almost everyone here will be familiar with Thomas More's Utopia from 1560. I will try to analyze the positions and roles and the corresponding sanctions on this island. Utopia invites this because there are very few positions, extremely few. No real society has so few positions, and so I can give you a near complete list. I think I forgot the king, but that's it. There's no more. It's all you can. For example, there are no more occupations. Everyone has to become a farmer for 2 years, and then there are 4 more occupations, and that's it. Variety and diversity are not welcome. All cities and all houses look the same. All people wear the same simple clothes. Not slaves. Slaves have gold chains, but except of them, the same clothes. They speak the same language. All of them have the same morals, institutions, and laws. There are no regional differences. The daily routine of all utopians is appointed to the detailed and controlled by the administration. Utopia is extremely standardized and uniform. The strict work ethic matches this downright monastic regime. Surveillance is almost ubiquitous. Privacy is made virtually impossible. There is no freedom of movement. Thus one has to play the role that is bound to the position. There's no room to escape this. Life in Utopia is simple, and it is easy to learn one's roles. Later to be able and willing to assume the role of a farmer, for example, which is the duty of all utopians at least 2 years in their life, all kids are not only taught how to grow crops theoretically and practically, they are also shown how idlers who walk away from work are punished. There are sanctions ranging from humiliation to severe castigation to slavery. Through this indoctrination, the role of the farmer is incorporated into the individuals. Ideally, there are no individuals anymore, but mere role bearers. And I quote a bit longish from Morris because it shows how extreme this indoctrination is. The education of youth belongs to the priests, yet they do not take so much care of instructing them in letters as informing their minds and matters aright. They use all possible methods to infuse very early into the tender and flexible minds of children such opinions as are both good in themselves and will be useful to the country, but not for the individual, as you may notice. For when deep impressions of these things are made at that age, they follow men through the whole course of their lives and conduce much to preserve the peace of the government, which suffers by nothing more than by vices that rise out of ill opinions. What does count is not the personality of anyone, but their function in maintaining society. Every individual is utterly replaceable. The economy is centrally controlled. It is a machinery in which the individuals have to function as standardized parts, both in production and consumption. When a family becomes too numerous, some members are integrated into smaller families. When Utopia becomes overpopulated, settlers are sent to colonies and they have to come back when population size on Utopia decreases. When looking through Dahrendorf's position role lens, Utopia seems to have eradicated all individualism, and of course Utopia is communistic. There are no individuals, only positions, and no utopian is ever alone. The doors of the houses cannot be closed. Meals are partaken of only commonly. Social control is institutionalized in the positions of patriarch and suffragant. The result of this is that role expectations are operative all the time. It does seem that Morris' Utopia is an instance of this most horrifying aspect of Homo sociologicus, and this means that Utopia is a dystopia. But Utopia is a utopia too. Compared with the order of medieval society, Utopia has to offer unheard of freedoms. One is free to religiously worship the sun, the moon, the ancestor, or whatever one likes, even Jesus Christ. One is free to collectively vote for the administration, albeit not against it. And one is freed from the drudgery and poverty most people in the 16th century were subjected to. The feature that is peculiarly marvelous for a utopian anthropology is the explicit assertion of humans' ability to create an ideal state. For More's contemporaries, it could sound quite rewarding to exchange the little personal freedoms they might have had for economic security and a certain sense of justice. Which social arrangement is assessed worthwhile depends on the perspective. And this raises a question. How can we put texts or images or architecture that describe alternative societies into categories of good utopia and evil dystopia. Not only Thomas More's utopia is two-faced. All classical utopian texts describe positions and roles and the sanctions necessary to perpetuate them while tending to ignore individuals. And yet they are intended to offer social and individual improvements for people. Usually, utopia gets rid of explicitly criticized evils of the real world. It was the classical dystopia that showed the cost of erasing social ills by erecting alternative social orders. The literary trick was that state novels were transformed into proper novels with human protagonists, with believable psychology. The focus shifted from the structure to the way individuals interact with those structures. When we look at the inner life of D503, Bernard Marx or Winston Smith, their respective positions and the role expectations directed at them are exposed as something external and deeply alienating. Not surprisingly, Samyatin Sui, Huxley's Brave New World and Orwell's 1984 have set an end to the classical utopia that was closed and static. Now, Ralph Dahrendorf's Homo sociologicus concept has a similar functionality. It focuses the sociologist's attention to the positions and roles in society. Thus, Homo sociologicus can show us the dystopian aspects of any utopia and, in fact, of any society, real or imaginary. This is an advantage, but we have to be careful with this tool. Too easily can it elicit despair, since positions and roles are inescapable. To ground my utopian anthropology exclusively on Dahrendorf would mean creating a Homo Dystopicus, the hopeless human that constantly stumbles from the frying pan into the fire. This is not what I want. I cannot go back to Homo economicus, but I want to embrace his voluntarism. And I cannot fully accept Homo sociologicus, but I need to incorporate society's constraints into my model. Where now? There are three discourses that can act as possible guideposts for my search for a utopian anthropology: utopian literature, social theory, and philosophical anthropology. I have almost no time left to elaborate on them, but I can sketch some general directions to give you an idea where I am heading for. First, literature. Even though many conservatives had hoped so, the classical dystopias have not been the nail in utopia's coffin. Since the 1970s, utopia and dystopia have merged into something that has been called critical or open-ended. The new texts are either utopias that explicitly deal with their dystopian aspects, or they are dystopias that do not deny the fruitfulness of utopian aspirations. Le Guin's The Dispossessed and Piercy's Woman on the Edge of Time are of the first kind, and Le Guin's The Telling of Paradise is Lost and Piercy's He, She and It are of the second kind. Robinson's, Kim Stanley Robinson's California Trilogy and Mars Trilogy are somewhere in between. And this class of utopia, dystopia amalgam is where I have to find inspiration, because it is ambiguity and in-betweenness that I'm looking for. I invented this word, in-betweenness. I didn't find it anymore. I do not want to model my picture of what we are on the nameless position holders and role bearers of classical utopia, or on classical dystopia's victims of totalitarian oppression. I'd rather orient myself by Shevek, Shira, and Arkady Bogdanov, and by the coyote, of course. Social theory. Since it has been invented, sociology is roughly divided into two camps. Individualism, following Max Weber, takes society to be the product of individual action. Structuralism, following Emile Durkheim, takes the individual as product of social conditions. Homo economicus fits into the individual camp, Homo sociologicus fits into the structural camp. That both camps are problematically reductionist has been recognized for a long time, and it informed a discourse on the so-called agent-structure problem, because sociologists didn't know how to cope with their agents and their structure, how do they interact. And this constitutes the third camp. Peter Berger and Thomas Luckmann, for example, suggested that there is a dialectical relation between society and individual. Pierre Bourdieu submitted his concept of habitus and social field as link between society and individual. These are somewhat sophisticated versions of role and position. And I'm not sure yet which theoretician to use, but maybe I can show you how Anthony Giddens' theory of structuration may be helpful for me. Have you noticed the paradox of work in More's Utopia I overlooked some minutes ago? It is exactly the strict work ethic that frees people from toiling in serfdom. Because everyone is forced to work 6 hours a day, which is a dystopian future, nobody has to work more than 6 hours, which is a utopian future. A similar paradox emerges in the field of wealth. It is exactly the impossibility of accumulating individual riches that prevents poorness. Giddens' structuration theory is able to explain this. For him, every social constraint has enabling aspects. It is the same with language. We need it to be able to think at all, but it constrains the way we think and what we can think. Giddens' theory is intriguing because it also encompasses psychological ideas and takes into account power, space, and time. In spite of all that, there might be even better social theorists. I haven't finally decided where to ground my utopian anthropology. But one foundation of my utopian anthropology is already fixed: Helmuth Plessner's philosophical anthropology. His notion of human as eccentric being that expresses itself in creating utopian societies is extremely useful. But I'm afraid I have to compliment Plessner by introducing aspects of Arnold Gehlen's philosophical anthropology. Gehlen saw the human as an actor that needs constraining institutions to make action possible. Since human's body is deficient, he called it Mängelwesen, deficient being, and since its instincts are undirected, too many options are available, and thus decisions are impossible. We need a relief from too much freedom through discipline to have any useful freedom at all. Gehlen argued very in favor of subjecting oneself to institutions, organizations, and society, and he was very uncritical about the specific properties of those institutions, so he was decidedly not utopian. Although his theory is not racist or anti-Semitic, it is compatible with him being professor both in the Third Reich and in post-war Germany. My usage of Gehlen will be decidedly critical, but some aspects of his anthropology are crucial and have also inspired authors of the agent structure discourse, namely Berger and Luckmann, so I cannot just ignore Gehlen just because he's unsympathetic to me. So, you're witnessing my walking the path to utopian anthropology that is also and necessarily a dystopian anthropology. You have heard of my being off the track for a while, but I hope that I have been able to point in the right direction. There are useful theories to incorporate and beautiful examples to explore, but surely there are stupid aberrations too. It would be very nice and helpful of you to rub my nose in the mistakes I have made. Thank you.
criticisms, tips, theories. I have a suggestion. This is obviously not my field, but what about Bruno Latour? Have you looked into his against, what is it called? He makes out of institutions, which are these constraints you're talking about. Actants. He makes them almost like personalities. So you were talking about breaking the structure between individuals.
We have never been moderns.
What's that?
We have never been moderns. It's the title of
one of his books. He's written a lot of his history of science, but I heard driving back from Rome to Norway, in Germany actually. It was a German interview, and it was an interview with Bruno Latour, who was a French guy, and they were talking. It was fascinating about actants. So he analyzes society, what Plessner and the others you're talking about seem to be sort of stable structures against which human roles and human, what was the other one you call it, positions, are banging themselves. But he makes these things into almost like personalities, which he calls actants. And then you get a sort of a very complex structure, what do you call it, interaction, theoretical possibilities between what is usually considered to be, the individual professor in his position against the administration, against his this big, huge box, and it might make these, it might give you, I got it, Homo Dystopicus. That's what you need. You need it between the two. So I think Bruno Latour might be maybe I'll make another symposium. So you can work on that. Let's see, Paula.
Peter, I think that in between us has a very nice French expression, which is entre deux.
Entre deux?
Between.
Okay. Sorry, I don't speak or read French, so I'm barbarian. I know. And I did not read Latour either, so thank you for and I have to read Foucault for Heterotopia too, I know.
Yes.
Okay, yes.
This is totally not my field either, but I just noticed, and I know you were only presenting a bit of your grand research, but I noticed the curious absence of any female voice in it, and I was wondering whether that might be the last.
The last picture was a woman there?
Yes, of course. It's always like that.
This is comedy and this is tragedy.
I know.
Maybe tragedy somehow.
I don't think Medusa is the way forward, but
so yeah, you're right, and this is one curious thing. I have more theoreticians, and they are all male too, and a very great deal of them are German, which the first time I talked about this was more than a year ago at my home institution, and they said, wait Peter, you only have German philosophers, isn't this nationalist methodology? And it was, I wanted to incorporate, of course, utopian thinkers like Ruth Levitas, who is not German and who is female, and others, of course, Lyman, Tao Sargent. There are many non-German thinkers and there are many non-male thinkers, but somehow this is a male-dominated...
but see, maybe that's why you're stuck.
That's good, very, very good. But the authors are, I have Moore and Robinson on the male side, and both very feminist authors, Marge Piercy and Ursula K. Le Guin, to somehow get through this painful situation.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, thank you very much for a very pleasant. And we now have lunch. which is going to be served right out of the doors. And we'll meet here again in about an hour.